Therapeutic Paradox, Restraint from Change Techniques in Family Therapy. Prepared and spoken by Lynn Hoffman, Senior Staff, Ackerman Institute for Family Therapy, New York City. This presentation is published by BMA Audio Cassettes, a division of Guilford Publications Incorporated, New York, New York. The segments of actual family therapy sessions are dramatized. All names of patients have been changed to maintain confidentiality.
The purpose of this program is to examine the disparate theoretical rationales that have been offered to explain the success of paradoxical or restraint from change techniques, to discuss effective implementation, and to present excerpts from an actual case history. The technique of asking clients to continue with a condition or behavior which they cannot help and which they want your assistance in overcoming is ancient and well known. It is not so well known why this technique sometimes works. There is the theory behind reverse psychology, which holds that people will stop having a problem when told to have it because they are oppositional. Viktor Frankl's rationale for what he termed paradoxical intention, telling someone to stutter on purpose, for instance, is that one cannot force that which is involuntary. Trying to have a symptom kills it. Family therapists from the original Bateson group in Palo Alto, in talking about what they call prescribing the symptom, offer an interactional explanation. This explanation states that symptoms are communications that control the behavior of others. If a therapist orders a patient to continue with the symptom will be abandoned because continuing with it puts the therapist in charge. In addition, this tactic acts as a therapeutic bind, closing all the exits to resistance. Either way the client goes, the therapist is in control. Other therapists, using a cybernetic analogy, believe that a symptom is a sign of a shift in family organization, unavoidable as a family moves through time, and that this shift is felt as potentially hazardous for the family. The family's resistance to change is seen as similar to homeostasis in a cybernetic machine. A child's problem may be deflecting the conflict between parents who might otherwise break up, and thus the problem maintains family balance. Prescribing the symptom typically leads to resistance, which may break up this particular homeostatic mechanism. If the problem disappears, the family may then be forced to find a new way to maintain equilibrium. I myself am beginning to think that the reason restraining people from change can produce such sudden shifts may not have entirely to do with oppositional or resistant or homeostatic tendencies in the client or family. Bateson noted that in the kind of expression represented by dreams or animal communications, there is no way to say not. I am indebted to psychologist Bradford Keeney for the idea that symptoms, like dreams, may be metaphoric communications from the family system back to itself. It may be impossible to say not to people caught in a complex symptomatic configuration. One is reminded of Bateson's description of how an otter, by biting the ear of another otter, but not biting it hard, signals, "This is play." The disqualified bite means not fight. Similarly, to say "don't change" and push the injunction to the point of absurdity in a context that implies change may be the only way in some situations to get the message "not symptom" across. It is the absurdity, the self-contradiction, that indicates not. Certainly many people react to a so-called paradoxical injunction as if you had told them to change, and they do. The main difference between this and a direct injunction to change is that in the former communication, the kind of change is left cryptic or implied. People will more often come up with their own solutions. Whatever one's theory, injunctions not to change often have a powerful effect in alleviating chronic and crippling conditions. In families where more direct approaches have failed, this one is often the key that unlocks the secret door. To tell people in such families, "Stop behaving in such and such a way," is as useless as telling an insomniac to try to go to sleep. But if you say, as Adler did to a man who had insomnia, "I want you to lie awake at least 1 hour every night, thinking only good thoughts about your wife," the technique may work quite well, and in this case did. Hearing the story, a colleague of Adler's expressed surprise. Adler is said to have replied, "But I knew he did not like his wife." The following examples of restraint from change techniques, a phrase I prefer to the more mystifying word paradoxical, since I see nothing paradoxical about most of these instructions, are taken from families I have worked with, either by myself or with a team watching from behind a mirror. The live interview material specifically illustrates work done with a team. Simple symptom prescription is familiar, and I will not elaborate on it. It is usually most effective with circumscribed problems of individuals, phobias, bedwetting, blushing, stuttering, and other semi-involuntary behaviors. It is not always necessary that other family members be present, and involves either asking a person to deliberately practice or to redouble the symptomatic behavior, or to pretend that it is happening. One way to prescribe a symptom without appearing to is to ask for a base-level count of behaviors the person wants to change, to record the number of times a week someone bites their nails, for instance. Occasionally, this directive alone cuts down on or stops the behavior. A more elaborate version, which would be done with a couple or family, is to link the symptom prescription with a change in the organization of the family. In one family I worked with, the mother had divorced the father after the father had a psychotic breakdown and became religious in a very crazy way. During the crisis, the man's older brother came to the wife's aid and later married her. The father greatly resented his brother replacing him in this way. The children of that first marriage, 2 girls aged 13 and 17, were unhappy with the relationship between their mother and the stepfather. They felt he was too bossy and that their mother did everything he told her to do. In addition, the younger girl was unhappy at school. The school guidance counselor sent them to see me. The work to be done was mainly structural, as it often is in step-families where the boundaries are all mixed up. But much of the work was accomplished with one particular instruction. It turned out that the 13-year-old would come into bed at night with her mother and stepfather at least once a week because of nightmares which scared her. She was the one who worried most about the mother and clung to her. Although both girls were uneasy with their father, who was still acting in bizarre and irrational ways, the younger girl was still very attached to him. I told the girl that she should continue to be unhappy at school and to show anxiety at home by having nightmares and getting into her mother's bed. In this way she would be faithful to both parents. By acting unhappy, she would reassure her father that she was not supporting the new marriage. By getting into bed with her mother, she would reassure her mother that she needed her very much. I also told the mother that she should choose one particular area to be boss in. To spare her daughter from seeming to reject her father, she must make the decision as to how and when the unpredictable father could communicate with the daughter. The older daughter did not need this protection because she could handle the father herself. The family picked up on both suggestions. The mother started to show more strength in relation to the stepfather as well as her former husband. The daughter apparently found other ways to be faithful to both parents, since she became demonstrably happier at school and stopped climbing into her mother's bed. If you are seeing a family and the person who is being complained about refuses to come, it is always possible to send a letter which prescribes the absence, but relates this to the situation in the family. In another case, a mother and father in their 50s came in. The mother was upset because she finally got so angry with their 26-year-old son and his endless demands on them that she agreed to tell him to go manage on his own. The father had long wanted to do this, but the mother had always been protective towards this boy and already seemed to be weakening in her position. She was depressed because since this incident he had not communicated with them. She had hoped the boy would be present in the session. I took advantage of his absence to write him a letter, reassuring the mother that in this way we would indeed include him. The letter went as follows. Dear Billy, this letter is to tell you that I appreciate the meaning of your staying away from this family meeting. In some way I sense that you, of all the children, have had the hardest time leaving home. By seeming to reject your family, and in particular by making your mother so angry that she took your father's side and said that she could no longer give you everything you wanted, you have done them and yourself a very great favor. They have finally had to recognize that you are an adult. Your parents are beginning to come together in spite of the many differences they had over you. Only now can you leave home with a clear heart. Your mother will be depressed for a while, but your father will comfort her. Your sisters will also gather close to comfort both of them. and you will finally start to realize some true independence. I applaud your decision to be so difficult that they, your parents, finally had to throw you out. I hope you will not weaken in your resolve. I did not see the couple again, but the mother phoned back saying that even though the son was continuing to stay away, she was feeling less depressed. Then there is the situation where the therapist is alone, but may not feel that he or she has enough power to control a situation, and will get a consultation from colleagues, often in written form. In this case, an aristocratic woman who had left her husband for a younger man came in distraught over the impact her remarriage might be having on her 14-year-old daughter. This girl lived with her mother. The mother was worried that the son of her new husband, who was doing poorly at school and was on drugs, would be a bad influence on her. The boy was also refusing to talk to or acknowledge his stepmother, and the mother was quarreling with her new husband over his reluctance to take steps to control his son. I was asked only to see the daughter, but my main worry was the mother. She had had a nervous breakdown before she married her first husband, and had been in treatment for many years. She was now talking about breaking off with the new husband, and I also feared she might have another breakdown. I felt that the children were reacting to the situation the adults were in, and that it would do little good to see the daughter alone. I did manage one meeting with the mother and stepfather, her daughter, and his son. After checking out the picture, I adjourned the meeting and said that I would have to get advice from a peer group who acted as my consultants. Shortly after, I asked the mother and stepfather to come in alone. They were beginning to fight very badly, and we talked about their problems both as spouses and as parents. I ended the session by reading them the following letter, and gave them copies for the two children. The letter read, "For the Brown household. My consultants feel that the children have all the power in this situation. The children know that Mrs. Brown, having spent her whole life making herself into the mother she never had, is vulnerable. She has reached out at last to get something for herself. But the children are loyal to their original families, Peter as spokesman for the Brown family, and Jane as spokeswoman for the Smith family. These two in particular know that they can, by their worrisome actions, force Mrs. Brown to renounce all claims to personal happiness, because, rather than fail to be the mother she herself never had, she will sacrifice herself, either by leaving Mr. Brown or having a breakdown, or both." In the face of this dilemma, my colleagues did not know how to advise me except to say that in their experience, in 85% of cases of households with conflicted loyalties between adults and children, the children always won. In this letter, you will notice the device originated by the Milan associates of placing the family against a mythical 85% of families who fail, in the hope that the family will try to beat the odds and prove the experts wrong. The letter may not have had much to do with the outcome of the case, but the mother did decide to let the daughter live full-time with the father, a much healthier situation since the girl's relationship with the father was a very stable one. She also forced the new husband to lay down the law to his son, who began to behave more responsibly and to get off drugs. The mother then calmed down, and neither threatened to end the marriage nor to break down. Another important category where restraint techniques can be used is when outside professionals are locked into a case in such a way that they are part of the problem. An example is the psychiatrist who, by medicating the identified patient, institutionalizes the symptom and thereby limits the possibility for family reorganization. Alternatively, the family may play one professional against another. It is important to stay out of such struggles, or, if one cannot, one can do as the Milan associates do. Prescribe the continuing presence of the competing professional or agency as essential to slow down or prevent change, or simply accept their presence at a meta level, thereby retaining control. As an example of the latter tactic, a young man who had had a nervous breakdown was brought home from a treatment center by the father. The father wished to care for him at home because he distrusted outside professionals. In this he was opposed by the mother, who believed in psychotherapy and had managed to get a female social worker to come twice a week to their house to treat the son. She also brought the family in for a consultation by a Milan-style treatment team I was supervising. We quickly recognized that to agree with the mother that family therapy was indicated would be to lose the father. Since the mother was already on our side, we attempted to win the father by placing the entire home treatment program, including the efforts of the social worker, under the father's authority. We then negotiated another checkup in a month. We negotiated about 5 checkups at monthly intervals, and the father attended most of them. The social worker, though invited, did not come due to a respect for confidentiality. The young man improved over the months. He began to work and to use the family car to go out with friends in the evenings, often coming home quite late. At this time, the strains in the marriage began to show. Simultaneously, the young man began to eat less, and the mother declared that this was a sign of a new breakdown, because the last one began this way. She wanted the son to go back on medication, and got the social worker to bring in a psychiatrist colleague to give him a mental status exam. The psychiatrist prescribed Narvane, which the young man refused to take. The mother became critical of the efforts of the social worker, who brought the whole family in with her for a consultation by the teen. The social worker hoped we would support her belief that the young man was better, not worse. She felt she had done a good job with the family and did not want to lose the case. During the consultation, the young man seemed not psychotic, but depressed. He agreed that he had made progress, but the strife between his parents was upsetting him, and, when questioned, he confessed that he had extreme scenarios in his mind as to what might happen to them if they continued to get on badly. Most especially, he feared his mother might leave his father, and his father would then lose the will to live. The following letter was read to the family in the hope of blocking any impending breakdown. We were also hoping that if we warned against the dangers of the boy continuing to see the social worker, the family would side with her and reject our idea. Here is our message. We see that Alan is indeed at a decision point. He has improved so much due to his therapy, and not forgetting the care that Father has provided at home, that he is beginning to entertain the idea of becoming more independent and self-sufficient. However, we are extremely worried lest Alan really make this choice. If he takes Narvane and also continues with his therapist, he may make even more progress, and this may activate his fears of extreme scenarios regarding the fate of his parents, should he ever become well enough to leave home and live his own life. In this case, our prediction is that he will make an even more extreme scenario for himself. He may choose to have another breakdown, this time one that unites his parents forever. The social worker is still seeing the young man, who has continued to improve. The next section will contain live excerpts from sessions with a family I saw in a team format while working on the brief therapy project organized by Olga Silverstein and Peggy Papp at the Ackerman Institute for Family Therapy. The excerpts will illustrate the use of metaphor to positively reframe the problem situation, how to explore the negative consequences of change, and how to build a systemic paradoxical injunction on the information thus gathered. 2 further segments will illustrate how to block a disruptive behavior by positively reframing it in the room, and how to prescribe a relapse by asking family members to imagine going back to when they first came into treatment. The excerpts will be done by actors, and names and other data will be changed to protect the family. Olga Silverstein was team leader and should get major credit for the handling of this case. The other members were Jillian Walker and John Clarkin, although at various times other therapists working on the brief therapy project took part. The family in question brought in a 13-year-old boy, Jed, who was in danger of being expelled from school because he was disobedient, did not do assignments, and left school without permission to go home. He was adopted when he was a baby, as was his brother David, 17. Amy, 12, was conceived just as Jed came into the home. This was an educated, liberal, bright family. Both parents were professionals and were highly motivated to help their children. All were doing well at that time except Jed. Jed seemed like a kind of rough, lovable pet who was affectionately tolerated, but of whom less was expected than the others. He had been diagnosed as hyperactive when he was 6 and had been seeing a psychiatrist until the summer before. The trigger that brought the family in for family therapy was twofold. First, Jed had moved out of a small, intimate school where parents were welcome to a junior high for children with special problems where the policy was, parents keep out. Second, Jed had refused to go back to see his psychiatrist. After the first interview, punctuated by constant interruptions by Jed, we began to put together a hypothesis. We linked the boy's disruptive behavior to the change in schools, and also to some worry about home, since he kept running home without permission. The mother was moving ahead in her career and spoke of herself as liberated. Our sense was that Jed was sensitive to any disturbance of the balance between his parents. The father was clearly the more protective and understanding one, while it was the mother who was most irritated by Jed's behaviors, which certainly disrupted her work. It was possible that Jed was unconsciously acting as a brake and doing so on behalf of his father. But these were only suppositions. Our first instruction to the family was that the parents each make a list of all the things they did to control Jed's behavior at home. The second session began with the lists, which were very long, and mostly consisted of benevolent actions, such as seating Jed next to a parent whenever the family went out. When the parents had finished, I came up with an interpretation of the way the family worked that was based on a metaphor I had thought of during the previous week. The metaphor was, as you will see, suggested by the theme of liberation. You have a remarkable family. You've organized in such a way as to minimize the way Jed can disrupt things, at some cost. And I ask myself, is this family like a sort of prison where Jed is the prisoner and the rest of you are the attendants? Or are you the prisoners, and is Jed the attendant?
I'm in prison. I'm stuck with this family.
I don't know. Maybe you're the one that holds the key to the door, and maybe it's hard to say.
If I hold the key, then I'd be able to get out. I mean, isn't that dumb? If I hold the key, I'm in jail. I don't want to be in jail no more.
Well, it's funny. Maybe you do have the key, Jed, because you're the attendant and all these people are in jail.
If I say I'm in jail, I'm in jail. I'm in jail.
It may sound organized. It sounds organized to me when I make a list. But of course these things evolve out of what seems necessary. I don't look at it as a system. It's just things that keep happening. It becomes a system.
Did you say there was a cost involved? Because that's certainly the way we feel.
Well, I just meant a price. Absolutely a price. That's why I asked all of you to come here, even though I knew you didn't want to discommode David and Amy one more time, because I felt they were paying a price, and if we were going to put our heads together, they might as well be part of it, because they are. This was the first time Jed had engaged directly with me on any subject. I then moved on to an exploration of the negative consequences of change. This tactic suggests that the problem does have a reason for existing, and that it may be preventing less desirable options from coming about. It is not a direct restraint from change technique, but, like the reframing metaphor just described, it lays the groundwork for one. It is usually disqualified by family members, so one has to be able to suggest some possible negative consequences oneself. You know, one of the things we like to think about before we start putting our heads together and saying, how could things get changed? Because, you know, you're paying a high price for this.
You're paying a high price for this, Dad?
I mean, home, the way you organize home. I'm talking about some of the things that might happen were Jed to become an angel overnight.
Angel? Angels are for girls.
Well, you know, that sometimes happens. And I wonder if you ever thought what would happen if Jed suddenly stopped being the problem in this family. You've organized so completely around this situation. Have you ever thought what would happen?
I think I'd be able to adjust beautifully. Dad would have a heart attack.
And you, Amy?
I'd be fine.
You'd be fine?
I think it would be heaven.
You think it would be heaven. David, do you think it would be heaven?
It might not be heaven, but it would be better in some ways.
I don't think it would be heaven, Jed, if you suddenly became good.
Are you sick?
During the times that Jed has been in great shape, I haven't felt, well, perhaps you think other people's symptoms would start. You know, symptom substitution?
I think it would entail reorganization.
Oh, it might. During the times Jed has behaved well, we haven't felt tense or...
How long have those times been?
Oh, a couple of days, a week.
Yeah, they haven't been too long.
We get tremendous relaxation.
We both could use more time, believe me, in general.
In here? No.
When the children go to camp or are out of the house or any one of them is away, we're not at a loss for what to do. And I think that if Jed became less of a presence in that sense just by being, quote, good, I think that would be dandy.
I don't know, Jed.
What? What don't you know?
If it would be so dandy if you suddenly became less of a presence in the obnoxious sense. I don't know. I think people would miss you.
Are you feeling all right?
Yeah, I really think people would miss you. When you get used to something, even something you don't like, you can sometimes miss it.
You won't miss his slap, Dave.
Neither will you, jerk.
Well, what do you think might happen?
Did you get that slap on film?
Well, what do you think might happen?
Hey, Dave, let's do it again.
Crazy.
Can I see your wonderful arrangement in action here? Like in the car when the two of you sit and Jed's between you or something like that?
All right, Dave, move over here.
Cut it out, Jed.
I don't want to move over there, Dad. This seat's very comfortable.
Are you putting on an act?
No, I'm serious. This seat's more comfortable.
This ends side 1.
I'm staying here.
One of you has got to move.
Let Mom move.
Mom is not going to move.
Get up and move to where you were originally. You're making me uncomfortable. David is uncomfortable and you're monopolizing this whole session. Now get up and move.
Jed, you sit over there and I'll sit over here.
Okay.
That's an example of what I mean. David refused to move, and Jed refused to move. You asked Jed to move, and he moved kicking and screaming, and is now sitting over there behaving obnoxiously. And, of course, David looks good and Jed looks bad.
All right.
That's just a small example of what I mean. That was really nice of you, Jed.
Now, wait a minute. A couple of things might have happened. One is that if Jed had not gotten up initially, I would have told David to move, and he would have gotten up and moved. And the second thing is that if he'd gone on a little bit longer, David would have gotten up and moved himself.
And the third thing, I think he would have gotten up and moved in a real-life situation.
Then he would have looked even better.
Well, I think that's the fact that we're here and talking about these things caused David to assert himself. Don't you think so, David?
I'd really rather sit here.
I know you would, but then you became more conscious of...
Yeah, I might have been more conscious.
Jed, do you see what a favor you did your brother?
No, I did my father a favor.
No, you did your brother a favor.
I did my father a favor.
Well, when you act like an ugly duckling, you make your brother look like a swan.
Am I an ugly duckling?
Yep.
Are you saying that?
The whole family's saying it. I'm not saying it.
You are.
But you know, you all have had to be so cooperative. It's like a ballet dance, the kind of movement that you make together to keep this boy almost in a special place. And so his awkwardness is bought at the price of your gracefulness. Or would you be this graceful if you did not have Jed to organize you?
Yeah, but it doesn't look all that graceful in real life. It doesn't seem graceful at all.
All right, I'll use a better word.
It's very sloppy. It's unsmooth, it's painful, it's disruptive, and it's not graceful.
I'm not talking about the inner feelings.
I know, it's the outer appearance that's not good.
Well, I thought you handled things very well just now. I thought your mother and father did a very good job. I thought you were very graceful.
I don't really know what you mean by graceful.
Well organized. You move as a team.
Well, it's not satisfying.
Of course it's not.
I think we all agree on the cause, and therefore we all try to remove it. But I don't agree. I mean, it sounds nice, the theory that David and Amy need that to look good.
I don't mean they need it.
And sometimes they look bad, too.
On the other hand, you see, maybe they have problems, or would like to have problems.
But they do have problems.
But Jed takes center stage.
I think you have a distorted idea of the family. They do have problems. If you want to call them developmental, okay. But Jed is light years behind.
Please, don't bang that, Jed.
There's another thing that I think Jed does. And again, this is more my thinking on the basis of having worked with many families. When somebody has been a problem for a long time and stops being a problem, and sometimes they do, there are a lot of unexpected side effects because people get used to things being the way they are. And I'm thinking of the teamwork the two of you have worked out to be so even together.
In a sense, Jed has given you the opportunity to build up a lot of credits with each other. Without Jed, you'd have to think of some other way. He's such an effortless way.
We were a team before Jed came along. When you get married, you're a team.
Don't be smug.
I'm not smug. There are lots of people who are married and aren't married now. For us, it works. Let me put it that way.
Well, it's very lucky, because you showed a tremendous amount of teamwork in the way you handled Jed. All I'm saying is that if Jed weren't here, I think you'd experience a disruption. In other words, a lot of things you've done as a family would have to change. And this is the kind of thing we like to warn people about. If we try to make a change, we have to expect that some of the consequences will be surprising.
I know that change in one's life as an individual or in a family or in any situation is disruptive, and I've usually managed to cope with change. But it's kind of boring to go along without any ups and downs.
Well, that's another thing Jed's done for you. He's kept life from being boring.
Now look.
We've had teamwork with other things. We deal with our respective parents pretty much as a team, and the other children are not free from problems. I had a rough time last night with David and through last week.
Yeah, he gave me some errands to do.
Yeah, you didn't do them like a punk.
Jed is a rescuer. This guy really is a rescuer.
Dad, can I sit back there?
Yes, if you don't talk to David.
Do you think that we see ourselves as a perfect family?
No, I see as an outsider that you have really organized yourselves in a remarkable way to minimize whatever is going on. You may not perceive it, but I perceive an extraordinary kind of interlocking behavior here that is very rare, believe me. Toward the end of the session, I went out for a consultation with the team, a standard feature of a Milan-style interview, and they suggested that I extend the prisoner's-jailer's metaphor into a rationale for asking Jed not to change his ways. Here is the message and the family's reaction. My team was struck by the way in which it is confusing whether the family is like a cage or a prison, and it's unclear whether Jed is the person you're keeping watch over or whether it's he who's keeping you locked up.
They're keeping me locked up.
It's a kind of game of jailers and prisoners. We're not sure who is which, and I think a lot of the pain that everyone experiences comes from that. The other thing the group noticed was that somebody here, secretly in their heart, might want to escape. But this might be very devastating to the family, because it's a very close family.
I can run away.
And in a sense, Jed, your job is to keep this game of prisoners and jailers going, because otherwise that person might in reality try to make a break for it.
I'm the one that's locked up.
I don't know. I'm not so sure.
I know. I can see.
I think it's very important, Jed, for you to play the part that you play, whether it's the one who's being locked up or the one who's locking everybody up.
Do you have the rules?
I think those are the rules of the game, that you play that part.
To keep it going?
Yep.
Those are dumb rules.
Are you saying that the group felt that the family is constricting, maybe for some or all of us at some time, or that there is someone in particular?
I wasn't sure. They felt that it might be more than one person, but at least probably one person might be feeling particularly constricted, and they weren't so sure. Jed says he'd like to make a break for freedom, but they weren't so sure. And so their admonition, really, was for Jed to continue playing this game, certainly until we find out a little more about it and what the consequences might be if you stopped. Okay?
Excuse me.
Will you agree, Jed, to continue playing this game of jail?
Maybe.
Please, will you agree?
Maybe.
Oh, that's very non-committal. Yes or no?
What college did you go to?
Yes or no? Will you agree to play this game?
No! Where did you go to college?
That makes me a little worried. Jed said that he wouldn't agree to play this game. However, I think that he probably has no choice.
Ha!
This segment is cut off at the point where I went right to scheduling the next session, deliberately not allowing the family to ask questions about the message or disqualify it. The reaction of the mother validated our hypothesis that although she seemed liberated, she was the one who felt most like the prisoner in the family. Jed's intense reaction to the message also made us feel we were on target. 2 sessions later, it came out that the reason Jed ran home from school was, as he put it, to see if my parents got divorced yet. The parents were surprised to know that divorce was on his mind. The mother said she thought that he might be supersensitive to the more frequent arguments she and his father had been having lately because of his history of being adopted. But at this point she was most angry with the school. Despite a school family conference I had organized, the parents felt the school was to blame since they had not been able to motivate the boy, and the school felt the parents were to blame because they did not discipline him. The parents, when asked why they did not discipline him, said that it was difficult because he didn't care for the usual activities and possessions of boys his age. Therefore, nothing could be taken from him. Also, the mother was so angry at the school that she refused to do anything more. If he got kicked out, she said, it was his responsibility. The parents and I knew, however, that the next step would probably be a residential treatment setting. And with Jed escalating his behavior, it looked as if he might indeed face that possibility. Olga Silverstein then came up with a quasi-structural, quasi-paradoxical task, which was to tell the parents that they were right in saying that they could not punish the boy in the usual way. Since the only thing that seemed to matter to him was his parents' unity, the only way they could punish him when he did something bad, like running home without permission, would be to deliberately argue and disagree about what should be done in front of him. This was conveyed to the family. The mother agreed to the idea, but the father objected. He said they hardly ever disagreed, and that if they did, they settled the argument behind closed doors, so that the children could not split them. I noticed that Jed was becoming increasingly restless during this discussion, hid behind the window curtain, kicked a wastebasket, interrupted constantly, or made loud humming noises. I slid into a digression aimed to block his difficult behavior by praising it.
It's always been an article of faith that we shouldn't let the kids play one of us against the other, and yet somehow that's not right.
Well, things that are right for one point aren't always right for another. Jed, you're not at fault. You're standing on a fault. Do you know what a fault is?
Yes.
A fault in the crust of the earth? Two platelets like the San Andreas fault?
I know what it is.
Well, in a family that has two parents, there's two people who are moving through life, and they can't possibly be moving at the same rate. And I have the feeling that you are super sensitive to the rate of movement, especially of people in your family. And these slight differences, which are so minute but creep from year to year, he's like those people who can put their ear to the ground and hear a storm far away or an army many miles away. And, Mother, I really feel that it would help if you would air some of your thoughts about his misbehavior. Not about your own personal issues, but when he misbehaves. I don't mean play act.
I don't think we'd have to play act.
No, but we'd have to create divisions where they don't exist. We react spontaneously to what Jed does. At least we react without having a conference on how to react. And he hears us.
But do you comment on what each of you is doing? Mother, do you comment on whether your husband is behaving correctly?
No.
When I think you're too tough, I just keep quiet.
And when I think you're too soft, I tell you later, privately.
I would say have it out right there. Would you give that a try, anyway?
Okay.
Okay, goodbye.
And Jed?
What do you want?
If you hear of any earthquakes, let me know.
You're right.
Jed's final comment, "You're right," delivered with a friendly pat on my shoulder as he went out the door, was the first time he had ever shown any acceptance of me. After that session, we had another where the mother actively opposed the father on their implicit rule that Jed never be punished. She asked that a fine be imposed when he was caught smoking cigarettes. Jed looked so worried at this display of parental disagreement that I suggested to him that he make one of those minor artificial earthquakes that prevent larger, more damaging ones. In the following week, he did just that. He came home from school without permission so often that the school finally expelled him. At this point, the mother called me to say that she had had a complete change of heart. She felt he was too young to leave home, and if need be, she would stay at home and tutor him herself. She also asked to continue meeting as a family. On the strength of my recommendation, the school agreed to take Jed back on a half-day tutorial basis. He went away to camp that summer. When he returned, to our great surprise, he was a reformed character. He had become a decent, respectable citizen, no longer rude or irresponsible, who took his studies seriously and adopted an almost priggish stand against self-destructive behaviors like not studying or smoking cigarettes. He also took to calling himself Dr. Jed in the session. He was mainstreamed into the school's 10th grade before the end of the year. These sudden changes sometimes happen in family therapy, and our hypothesis was that Jed no longer needed to act out to keep Mother home because she herself had made a commitment to the home. This was not the end of treatment, as several more difficulties came up and were dealt with during the course of the year. David in particular began to have academic problems. But by that next spring there were no more problems to speak of. In the next excerpt, which comes from the last session, I ask each person present what they would have to do to get back to the way they were when they first came into treatment. This acts as a suggestion that change will not be maintained, and hedges against or counteracts that possibility. It was interesting to me to find that the biggest change reported on in the family as a whole had to do with increased freedom of subgroups of the family to move about and do different things, where before the family went and did everything together in a block.
We'd like to know what each of you think you would have to do, I wish we did have David here, to bring things back to where they were when Jed first came in, when I first met you. I'd like to ask from each of your points of view, how would you have to change back, if indeed you perceive you've changed at all?
I wouldn't want to change back to the way I was when I first started.
What would you have to do in order to push it back?
I'm just a natural mess-up.
What sorts of things would you be more likely to be doing? Like failing everything in school, cutting class?
Wising off to teachers, smoking in class.
Smoking grass?
Smoking in class. I don't smoke dope. Then I wouldn't be able to be a doctor. It affects your mind. Scientific fact.
I get the picture. Now, I am going to ask your parents what they would have to do. In other words, Father, what things would be characteristic of the way you were when you first came in?
I'm really perplexed by this question. I don't understand it.
The question is, what would you have to do to get back to the point where the family first came in?
What would I have to do?
Yes, because you were part of this whole dance, you know, the whole arrangement that was going on around Jed.
It's impossible to get it back.
I'm not saying that it's possible or impossible. Could you describe some of the behaviors that would put you back there? If you come from there to here, can you imagine how to get back?
I cannot imagine David returning to his pristine state, but that's part of it.
I'm asking you, how would you have to do it? You were saying there were some things you thought were more open in the family. More open talking.
Well, that's right. That's all I could say. I would be more closed.
You would be more closed. Okay, that's an example.
Aren't you just asking in a sort of reverse way, how have you changed?
No, there's more to it than that, because it's very possible that you could go back to something like that Jed could organize you back, or that you could all become organized back again. It also has the advantage of putting in some conscious sense of what would be involved in going from here to there. The process of going back is a way of making it more conscious.
I'd be more oblivious to the incipient problems of David.
What about Amy?
Amy? I wouldn't worry about that.
Could you describe any other behaviors you might have to go back to? For instance, you don't act now as if you were stepping on eggshells so much.
It's maybe a question of being less afraid of my feelings and being willing to scream and not feeling there'd be harmful consequences.
That's fair enough. That's all I was asking you. Mother, what would you have to do?
Well, I've thought about it. I'd have to go back to thinking that Jed was the problem in the family and think of my other two as the angels that they, of course, were. And I also disagree with my husband. The problems that Amy is experiencing in school now are problems that definitely come from things that have been going on in the family. I don't know why they're happening, but I think they're a response to fears about David and anxiety about him in school. I think they have something to do with things in the family, but I think they're quite temporary.
What would you have to do in order to push it back?
I would have to go back to, well, perhaps I didn't make it clear, but the sessions have had an impact. I'd have to go back to thinking I could fix everything, which I no longer think I can do, nor would I want to. I sort of feel that if things are going to happen, they'll happen. And I feel quite able to cope with it. But they're just going to have to be worked out. I mean, they're not going to be fixable immediately. So if there's anything I've learned, it's that.
What about between the two of you? There was a point when, if you made an agreement, at least in regard to the kids, it would be your husband who came out on top. Apparently, when you aired your disagreements more openly, there was a more even balance. Because I remember you saying you felt a burden was lifted off you when you were able to come out openly and take different positions in front of the children.
Yes, I think that's been much better. And I was part of that, too. I think we've both changed.
And there's much less of Jed saying, don't get divorced.
You really are more balanced then.
Hey, please don't do that.
I'm waiting to say something. I'm waiting for such a long time that I can't handle it anymore. Hurry up, you have to have some patience waiting outside.
Okay, well, hurry up.
It's true, my wife does get her way more, but it's because I have changed. It's not because I give in to her. It's more a matter of seeing it that way. She and Amy are going to take a trip to Boston. We started as a family trip, the four of us. Jed is just such a pain on those occasions that he shouldn't go. Why should he spoil it for everybody? And that evolved into, well, I'll stay home with him. That would have been unthinkable a year or so ago, I'll tell you that.
So you weren't so liberated as we all thought.
No, not to that point.
But I mean, cutting him out of something, why not? Why shouldn't we?
So it really did liberate you to be more separated, as individuals, twosomes, whatever.
Well, wait. If you're liberated, who's fighting for me?
Yourself. Wait a minute. What about Amy? Amy, do you have any perspective on anything that would be different? If things were to go back, can you think what you would have to do?
I don't know. Keep my mouth shut.
You mean that would make Jed the center of attention again? If you didn't fight for yourself more?
I don't think I've changed.
Okay, that's your perception.
That's because she was never really bad. Okay, class dismissed. Make another date.
Good luck on never changing. Goodbye, Dr. Jed.
God bless me.
In all, the family was seen 14 times, in different groupings, usually at monthly intervals. Naturally, much more was addressed than appears here, including the issues around adoption. Time, space, and confidentiality set a limit on giving further information on this case, except to say that 4 years after the last session, the changes had held firm and the family was experiencing no major problems. Before ending, I must address the issue of indications or contraindications for the use of restraint from change techniques. Many people believe that these techniques should be reserved for hardcore resistant problems. Even with less resistant families or clients, they should only be used when straightforward methods have failed. I disagree with this. One could even say the opposite, that restraining moves should be used first, and only when the family is beginning to move forward should more direct techniques be used. In any case, it is true that strategic and systemic therapies take restraint from change as their basic stance. The Milan associates, in particular, feel that the symptom has a logic and a fit within the larger coherence of the family. Their emphasis on finding a hypothesis as to what that fit might be indicates their respect for any behavior that has evolved within a group. To dislodge such a behavior will always entail a disruption, and the more difficult it is to dislodge, the worse the disruption is likely to be. Hence the warning about the dangers of change. However, one must distinguish here between restraint from change as a basic philosophy of treatment and restraint from change as a tactic or technique. When used in the latter sense, messages not to change are always pushed to the edge of the absurd, justifying to some degree the title paradoxical. There is another myth that these techniques should not be used with disorganized, multi-problem families, usually poor ones. Now, most families have sufficient attachments between people to at least keep them from whirling off into outer space. You can usually count on some recoil from these attachments if you use a restraining injunction. For instance, in one poor black family I was helping to supervise, an aunt was raising a 14-year-old girl whose mother had several children out of wedlock. The aunt was worried that the girl, who was dropping out of school, might get pregnant. The therapist told the girl that she was caught between divided loyalties. She wanted to live with her aunt and adhere to her aunt's ideas of what was right and proper, but that would be disloyal to her mother. Perhaps dropping out of school and getting pregnant, as her mother had done at about the same age, was her way of being loyal to her mother while still living with her aunt. The girl came in the following week announcing that she planned to finish high school before she did such a stupid thing as having a baby. This is not, of course, to deny that in many cases multi-problem families need education in how to organize, how to structure things. But saying automatically that you can't use paradox on these families writes off a whole repertory of helpful moves. In general, it is my belief that interest in paradoxical or restraint from change techniques is growing rapidly, and that the resistance that came from the mistaken idea that these techniques were somehow dishonest, manipulative, or gimmicky is lessening. There is now a new sense that quite the opposite is true. that these techniques may indicate a genuine respect for the complex meaning of a symptom in a family. The paradoxical approach is really an approach based on an understanding of polarities. In this respect, it is similar to the teachings of the I Ching, the ancient Chinese Book of Changes. If one reads the meanings of the hexagrams in the I Ching, one finds that they always deal with the double-sided nature of all things. In the hexagram Kuei, or opposition, one finds the reading, "In general, opposition appears as an obstruction, but when it represents polarity within a comprehensive whole, it has its useful and important functions. The oppositions of heaven and earth, spirit and nature, man and woman, when reconciled, bring about the creation and reproduction of life. In the world of visible things, the principle of opposites makes possible the differentiation by categories through which order is brought into the world."
This ends the program.